I'm Carl Swenson from Lancaster, Minnesota, and I was born on a farm about 2.5 miles west and a half miles south of Lancaster. Born in 1915. My dad was a farmer, and but my dad died when I was about 7 years old. But later on, my mother married another man, so we had a real good stepfather. And those days, I guess the Model T car was the most popular car. It was the cheaper of any of the others. For about, I think if I remember right, $450 you could buy a Model T.
So you think things have changed from then till
yeah,
now?
And of course, those days, most of the farming was done with horses. Although just about the time I was growing up as a youngster, tractors began coming into the farming business. And then there was some horses and some tractors. So that you don't see any of that nowadays at all. It's all modern, streamlined equipment of all kinds. Tractors, combines, and trucks. We didn't know what a combine was when I was a young man. As of course we expect changes, and those days we had a doctor, but the doctor was not as available as you find your doctors nowadays. He had an office. Our doctor had an office in Hallock, but the doctors would make house calls in those days. They come right if you had somebody real sick in your home. I remember the doctor coming out to see my dad before he died. He caught a cold and it turned to pneumonia right away, and he lived about a week after the pneumonia set in. The pneumonia then once you got pneumonia, you were practically gone, because they didn't know what it was or what to do for it or anything, which is much different nowadays. They've got medications for many of those things that they didn't have when I was a young man. Of course, then I went to school in Lancaster, and the first day of school, as a youngster, I was under the impression that all you'd ever see in school was kids. Well, my first day in school, I know I went in the north entrance of our school then, and as I was going up the stairway, the professor, his name was Sunderland, came down the stairway, and I was quite surprised, and not knowing any better, I asked him, "Aren't you too old to go to school?" I was talking to the superintendent of the school. And he told my mother about it sometime later, and then she told me again. I didn't remember that I had said that. And of course, again, the difference in times. We had winter time. We rode to school on a sleigh. In the wintertime, it was a set of sleigh runners underneath a kind of what we call a school van, and this school van had a wood heater, or kind of a round object on the outside the van that fired wood. Every once in a while, the driver, they were pulled by a team of horses. The driver would have to get out and fire up the stove a little more because it was getting colder. It had a kind of a mesh where the heat came under the seat into the bus. And when I think of it now, it's kind of crude, but we'd have to, our place happened to be the first place he picked up kids.
How many kids did you have in your family?
In our family?
Yeah.
Well, there was, I'll have to count if I count my brother. I had one brother died from the flu. 6.
And you live? Did you
Five
live in
girl.
town, or you live in town, or
No, we lived on the farm all the time when I was a kid. Either way, we had moved from that farm again. But after my dad died, my mother and all us kids moved over to live with my uncle, who was our neighbor. You know where Donald Nelson lives? Oh, you don't? Well, anyway, just a quarter of a mile from our place. So we stayed with him for a number of years until my mother remarried. And we didn't, again, we got to the point where the buses, they finally begun improving somewhat. After that, they put these vans on the Model A truck chassis, and they hauled us by truck into school. And then let's see. Have you got any questions? It'll kind of promote this thing in somewhat of a
were you like involved in any sports or any like extracurricular things in school?
No, I did. After I got to 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, I started practicing basketball, and of course it was a little difficult because I'd stay after school for practice sometime, because then I couldn't ride the bus. Then I'd have to walk home when we were done practicing or playing a game. My folks, they didn't attend to too many of the games, but so I'd have to stay after school if we had a game in town. Then I'd walk back. We lived on our Martin Peterson. You don't know where we lived at. That was our farm where we were raised. Most of us were raised just along railroad track as you go toward Orleans here on the north side of the road. Then they would, like I said, then I'd have to walk home, and I'd get on the track for a shortcut. I'd have to walk across the railroad bridge, and that scared me quite a bit because with no railing on it. But I made it every time anyway. Sometimes I'd ride a horse, and there was a barn fairly close to the school that we used to keep our horse in. That was about come in for practice or something. And
were you like, you went right after high school, were you drafted into the service? Or?
Yeah, for a couple of years after high school, for 1 year I worked in Minneapolis. I worked for my uncle down there. He was a foreman in a polishing and plating shop where and while I was working there, most of their work was they polished the parts for a toaster, a Toastmaster toaster. You know what a Toastmaster toaster is, don't you? Yeah. Well, and they would polish them there and plate them and assemble the toasters. And I was in the polishing department there. I worked for about a year for my uncle. He was the foreman there. And then I came home, and I bought a truck, a used truck, and with a gravel box on it, and I hauled gravel. A lot of roads around the area were being gravelled at the time, and they hauled the gravel from up north here at the pit next to the Canadian line there. And for several years I did different jobs with the truck. Finally, I got a job at Orleans with the Orleans Grain Company at Orleans. There was 2 elevators there, and I took care of both of them. One of them was mostly for storage, and I lived several years in Orleans, about 2 years in the advantage of the elevators, and then I just did odd jobs around there for about a year. It was a real good place to live. They had a lot of good people up there, and I enjoyed my stay in Orleans. And then in 1942, I was drafted, and they called me in. It was in the spring of 1942.
How far in, like World War II, when had that started?
Well, okay, it was from, remember, Pearl Harbor was that same year. I suppose it must have been 4 or 5 months or something between. I couldn't exactly say until I looked it up, but it was sometime after Pearl Harbor, and they drafted anybody they could those days, but they would allow people that, for instance, if your folks were the only ones beside yourself on a farm, they would let you stay out to help take care of it. So because we needed not only send troops into the war, but they had to feed them too, you see. So well, anyway, I got called in the spring of 1942, and rode to Fort Snelling in St. Paul on a Greyhound bus. They were somewhat different buses as we have now, but anyway, we went down there, and there they had a kind of a screening system. We were beginning to be initiated into the Army at the time. We did quite a lot of marching, and then they had a lot of, Fort Snelling was expanding at the time, and
Okay.
And then at Fort Snelling at the time, they were expanding, enlarging the area, and so we had to do quite a lot of manual labor, digging, chopping trees, and making more room. And a kind of a funny thing happened when I was there. They sent a guy out with us in charge of our detail. There was a lot of city kids, didn't know much about a lot of things going on the farm or in the country. So they took us to detail. It was, I suppose, 8 or 10 men, and they had to go to get to the supply room and get tools, shovels to dig with, and somebody had to get an axe, and they asked who could handle an axe, and I said I could. Naturally, we'd had to chop the wood for our farm, for our heating stoves. That's all we ever burned was wood. Well, later years it was oil, but a couple of other guys took axes too, and we got out there where we were supposed to chop down some trees, and they looked at the thing. What do you do with it? They didn't know what anything. Had never seen an axe, I guess, but they must have certainly heard about George Washington when he chopped down a tree. But I don't. And so I started chopping this tree down just like we had learned to do when we were at the farm, and they. Guys stood around and said, "Look at that! Look what he's doing!" It was real funny for me. And so we spent some time at Fort Snelling, and while we were there, they would take us in and interview us, and tried to find out where we would be best suited in the service, where we would fit. Well, most of my life, my brothers, somewhat the same, we were quite interested in mechanics. I remember. One of my main projects, I had picked a clock apart. It wasn't running, but I had it running when I got back together again. So that, but we did all our own mechanical work and things like that. So, after a number of interviews, they come to the conclusion. Of course, they were doing this with everybody else too, that is getting them placed. That I would be best suited, possibly, as an Air Force mechanic, because they were beginning to be in demand. There was a few airplanes being shipped overseas at the time, and of course the B-17s were the first ones there. And they shipped me to they shipped me to St. Petersburg, Florida, for what they call basic training. And basic training consisted of some learning and it was all learning actually, but not very much book learning. It was marching, a lot of marching, and formation marching, and learning commands and learning discipline. That's what they call basic training. We'd been there for a certain length of time, and then they assigned us to where they thought we would probably do the best job, and I was assigned to an Air Force unit. And leaving in Florida, then I was real happy to leave because I never was in such a hot weather in my life. We wore what we call our suntan uniform, and I had to change uniform sometimes 3 times every day because it was soaking wet from sweat. And that was real uncomfortable. But then they sent us to Boca Raton, Florida. No, we didn't go to Boca Raton, that was later, to Gulfport, Mississippi, where they had a aircraft maintenance training school. So we went in there, but at the same time as we were training, learning about aircraft, we were still marching every day. From our barracks, we'd have quite a distance from our barracks to where the school was, but we'd have to make a formation every day to go there. We just couldn't go up there helter-skelter how we wanted to. We'd have to march in formation, and I became one of the formation commanders, I guess I'd call them. For some reason or other, I could be made myself heard real easy. I had a pretty strong voice. And then as we went to school there and learned more about airplanes, I suppose that's all they had to train with or to teach us, but it was, we never the airplanes I got with later on after we got overseas was the P-51, which was a 12-cylinder inline engine. It was a V-type engine. But anyway, we went to this school and we did learn a lot of things about, of course, discipline and marching and good basic training, I would think. And then after when we got to the end of the school, they were taking two of the students with the highest marks. Mm-hmm. And they could have a choice if they wanted to, because they needed officers. And you had a choice if you come out with a high mark, you would have a choice if you wanted to go to an officer's training school or join just stay as an enlisted man. Mm-hmm. But I chose officer's training. I really don't know why, but at the time that's what I thought I would like. And
would it be better to be an officer there than?
Well, as an officer, you have a lot more responsibility. An enlisted man, you like to see everybody take a lot of responsibility. You teach them responsibility if you can. But I liked what I was doing. I got in as I didn't get to be an officer then, but I had to go to officers training school. And as we finished our schooling there, then like I said, they sent us back to Florida. That was Boca Raton, Florida. They sent us to there then, and we were known as cadets. And Boca Raton, Florida I think it belonged to some millionaire. It was just a beautiful place, nice, kind of almost like a hotel. I suppose it was a hotel, rooms and good kitchens, facilities, and so we were lucky there. We had good eats all the time, but it was hot. Every day it was hot, and I never cared much about.
Quite a change from Minnesota.
Yeah, and and when I got out of there, I says to myself, "This is the one place I'll never come back to," and I've been there yet. But then there's where we begin training. They call us cadets, and then we begin training to become an officer later on after some more schooling. And upon completing our responsibilities there, we were sent to Yale University. Now that's really highfalutin stuff, isn't it? The Air Force had taken over the Yale University, and was parts of it anyway, I guess. And there we were sent there for further training, and again much marching. And there we marched there we got different uniforms, and we had to learn all about marching, and we were then beginning to become an officer. Mm-hmm. And so little by little we took more responsibility and tried to, we knew we were going to become officers, or you wouldn't have to, you could flunk there too. So there was some people that flunked that, they'd have to start over someplace again. But after, I think it was 3 months or 4 months of what you call cramming. Just we were working hard all the time with our studies, and then learning some more about aircraft mechanics and officers' responsibilities. And after I heard later on that after we had finished our training there, the, you might say that the school type training that we were taking, they said that we had between Boca Raton and Gulfport, Mississippi, and at Yale, we had taken the equivalent of a three-term college or 3-year college course. And well, I don't know if I'd have been able to pass a test on a 3-year college education, but we did have to learn a lot of things, a lot of book, like the Lil Abner would say, a lot of book learning, and then of course discipline training. And we got, as we graduated there, we had a regular graduation just like they have at college or college. We had to come up front and take our papers, and then somebody would pin a bar on us. We thought we were really big stuff. We got a second lieutenant bar, you know, a gold bar, 1 gold bar. And from then on, they have kept us fairly busy until our time to come to ship out. So we got on the Queen Mary, I think it was. I can't quite remember if it was the Queen Elizabeth or the Queen Mary. They were bigger passenger ships at that time. And so I was shipped to England, and Chelmsford, England was my first base. And as we went to, I was naturally, there were just not too many airplanes over there then as yet. But so they made me what they call a technical inspector. I had to go to the air bases we did have and check for safety features. For instance, as long as they were supposed to have their fire extinguishers in a certain place, so they would be, you know, quickly, you know, so they could grab them and put out a fire if anything began to burn. And so I did that for a while. At first, we didn't have any vehicles, and of course, England is a country of bicycles, so they bought bicycles from England, and I got, instead of a vehicle, I got a bicycle. And a lot of cobblestone streets there. And if you ever try and ride a bicycle on a cobblestone street, but especially when it's kind of damp, and England is damp a lot of the time. But anyway, the time finally came when they did issue me a Jeep and a driver, and I was second lieutenant with a Jeep and a driver. But it was naturally part of the game. I mean, that's the way it's going to go. So my driver would take me around to the different bases, and I'd have to check their hangars and all their stuff they were working on or where they were working on. But then finally the day came when I got a notice. They transferred me to a fighter squadron that had just begun operations in England, and we were at can't remember the name of the town that the base was near, but I came in there as an assistant engineering officer, and they had at the time they had just not very many P-51s there, but there was some. The P-51 Mustang, they called them, but otherwise they started out with the English. What do they call the English airplane? But anyway, I was assigned to a squadron, to a group there by engineering section, they called it, and I was in charge of crew chiefs and assistant crew chiefs. There would be two mechanics for each airplane, and then there was an armament man that took care of the guns, to see that they were reloaded again after the pilot came back from a mission, and then checked the guns to see they were in condition. And then the radio man, he had to take care of the radio equipment. Each airplane had a radio on, you know, that he could call back to the base, and they get their landing instructions and everything like that. And they had to take care of that. And then there was armament man that took care of the guns, or did I go over that? But they, so there was quite a number of men. In fact, we had 24 airplanes eventually. We didn't then, but as we got more airplanes, then of course we had to take care of more. Finally, we got 24 airplanes, each squadron in a group. A group consisted of 3 squadrons, and each squadron had their own.
Were these planes made any different, like out of material, than like now?
Well, right now you don't find very many fuel. I mean, you'd find mostly jets now. You know, jet was never even thought of at the time. Yeah. But so we had these were 12-cylinder V-type engines, and but then P-47 came over about the same time. That was a radial engine. That's what they call the workhorse in the Eastern Theater of Operation. The ETO, we used to, that was the short Eastern Theater of Operation. That was England, England, France, Germany, and Belgium, and as we got going, our P-51s proved out to be the best escort. They would escort the bombers, and like the B-17s, where they had different base than we did, but our pilots would what they call a rendezvous with the B-17s on their way into the mission, and so as they would, we'd probably have to furnish each squadron would probably they wanted you to have at least 18 of those airplanes ready for a call to a mission at any one time, because you were bound to have some of them down for repairs. And so we then from England, from that base, we moved to one other base, Chelmsford, I believe it was, and but by that time we had our regular airplanes, and I had lost my assistant engineering officer. He wasn't any good anyway, so I didn't mind it. So there were some of those officers that weren't as much good either. They were, but then finally, just a while before D-Day, to make things, we don't want too much detail anyway, and before D-Day, about 3 weeks, I think, before D-Day, that's when we invaded France, and our troops went in. First it was the infantry and paratroopers went in. And
you were in England then, at this time?
What?
You were in England at this time?
Yeah, we were in England at that time, yeah. And the parachutists and the infantry they took over the beaches, where we would be landing a little later on. Yeah. And then about that time, we were really beginning to have a lot of action, because they were calling for a lot of dive bombing or strafing. Our pilots would have to go in and drop their bombs on a spot someplace, and then on their way back, they would come down and strafe probably a railroad bridge or something like that to knock out their transportation. And then they would come back sometime. Naturally, they'd come back short of airplanes sometime. Some of the pilots had got shot down, and but when they'd come back from a mission, some of them would be pretty well beat up. They would have some holes shot in them in the wings or some, and then of course the sheet metal men would have to go to work. We had a sheet metal man in each squadron too. They'd have to cut out aluminum pieces and patch up the airplane so it'd be ready for, and if it could be used again, then the mechanics would fix them, get them going again. And then we went.
Didn't you one time tell me that about you made kind of a windshield wiper?
Like, yeah, that came a little later. Then after, of course, after D-Day, after our ground troops had gone in there and paratroopers and made the beaches somewhat reasonably safe so that we could go over there and land, then my squadron commander, he called me in and he said, "I'm sending you and 15 men, and you're going to ride in with the infantry and on forget what they call those landing craft that they would go from England over there. They had a big gate at the front that they'd slide up to the beach as close as they could get, and then they would drop this front, and the troops would just march right off onto the beach and into wherever they were going. And of course we had to do the same thing. And I took 15 of my men, some of my better mechanics, and just what they call a skeleton crew to take care of any airplanes that would come in first before our whole outfit moved over. But so we went inland. We rode on these landing craft across the English Channel and went up, started walking inland toward where we were supposed to report to this command post. And it was quite a thing, because as we were going in, we were meeting jeeps with their windshields put down and stretchers on them with wounded men, mostly wounded. I suppose some of them were dead. But we, and as it began to get dark, so I told my men, the ones I had with me, why don't we find we didn't dare, we had our sleeping bags with us, but we didn't dare lay on top of the ground because there were still enemy troops around the area. And so I said, well, why don't we check these trenches? And then, they had dug trenches as they moved ahead. And I said, we better check them first so we might find dead bodies in them. So we were lucky enough to find a few. So we climbed in there. Down in the trench it was about, I suppose about 2 to 3 feet deep, maybe more. And we had our pup tents with us in our backpack, and so we just unrolled them and laid them over the hole because it had started to rain a little bit, sprinkle. So then, of course, after a while that settled on and they started dripping on us. But anyway, we didn't sleep very late the next morning. We did sleep some, but then we got to the command post, and they put us on a truck, an army truck, to take us out to where it had been a French airfield in the first place, and the Germans had taken it over. But everything was in good condition there. I guess the pilots they didn't want to bomb that one because they knew we were going to use it when we got over there. We were the first Air Force outfit on the continent. So I was the first Air Force man on the continent.
On the European continent?
On the continent of Europe.
Oh.
Yeah. And so then we got out to where this base was. The runways was in pretty good shape. There was some bombs that had landed. When the engineers come over, we had to fix it up. But we had to get things lined up enough so our airplanes could come in and start landing. So we worked on that just as much as we could and got the engineers to help us with some stuff. But we had to be careful because there was still snipers around, and all around the end of the peninsula. The Germans had built fortifications. They were armor, practically bomb-proof and everything else, and there was the sleeping quarters and eating quarters and everything in there. They'd go from, and then they'd take turns on the guns, I suppose. They were supposed to be able to shoot out anything that came close. And but anyway, our airplanes finally did come in, and so we started operating there right off, on the European country in France. And we'd send our pilots. First, we had to help the infantry. The infantry was heading south. What they wanted to do was clear the south end of France. And of course, then we were backing them up. And so we kept on going. We were at 2 more fields before we hit the southern end of France, when we considered France was clear at the south end. And then from there, things were getting pretty hot up at, the Germans had broke loose and come back, started at us, at our infantry troops, driving them back. So we, at that time, then they wanted us up in that little country of Luxembourg, which was they were a neutral country, but they were going to let us use their fields for landing strips. So then we moved up to Luxembourg, which was quite a trip, with GI trucks and troops sitting in the back, and of course I had a Jeep and a driver, so it wasn't pretty easy for me, but then we got up there and got set up, and I was surprised, why would a neutral country want to get involved, but they just said if you want to use it, use it. We didn't, nothing made of it, but I suppose the Germans would have, if when they did break loose, they were right close to Luxembourg almost when they were still fighting in the deep woods back in there.
Well, they had just broken us through a small part of the infantry, or?
A what?
They had just broken through a small part or something?
Yeah, but they were beginning to spread. And then we flew missions from there and went in and helped the troops. They'd go in and dive bomb and strafe as many as they could. And finally they straightened them out, so we got to go in. We got to go in. The first place the infantry where they could cross into Germany was a railroad bridge, and of course then they put guards on the river down below on both sides, so nobody would, so they wouldn't float some bombs or something and wreck the bridge. But anyway, then the engineers, they fixed the bridge so they could drive across with trucks. And of course some drove across and some walked across. But from there on we went into Germany, and we ended up at name of the city down here where we ended up at an airfield up in the northern half of Germany, and we stayed there until the war ended. And the war ended in 1945. What the date was? Anyway, and it was still we had moved one more time after we finished that dispatch. We moved into southern part of Germany, which was the name of the city. We were near there. There we just waited until we could get shipped home. And of course, while we were at this other base too, everybody was, we realized the end of the war was close, and still nobody dared let up because they wanted to keep the pressure on. But then after we got down to that field down south there, then the war was over, so we had just kind of we had to lined up our airplanes there that we had.
Okay. When you're going back, you're ready to go home?
Yeah, we were down there, and they had decided to give the Russians our airplanes. Of course, they had come into the war too, toward the last over there. And rather than ship them home, go to all the expense of shipping them home and stacking them up here in some field where they would rot or rust, they just gave them to the Russians. And of course, I told our crew chiefs to have them ready to go when the Russians came in. The pilots, Russians, could come in and get the crew chief would take them out to the airplane and get them in the cockpit, and we're going to show them something about the airplane, and all the Russian pilots wanted to know, where is the switch? They wanted to get going. Well,
that's kind of ironic that we gave them planes.
Yeah, isn't it? It really is. They could, if they'd have saved them, they could have used them against us.
No.
They were a good airplane, though. They were, and of course these airplanes that they got, they weren't any of them junk. Some of them were fairly new. We were getting new airplanes every once in a while because we lost too many, and so they got in there and got the airplanes out of there. And then a few days later, we got orders to go to base. Well, anyway, aboard a ship for home anyway. So we got the trucks hauled us out to where we could get on the boats, and that was, I think, the Normandy was we came home on, and of course that was kind of an enjoyable trip. We knew the war was over, and it was near Antwerp. This is where we boarded the ships, but they came and then we kept on. I went up on deck one time, and I began to get so seasick right away, I went back down again. and I didn't come up again until somebody hollered that they could see the Statue of Liberty. And then, of course, everybody was on deck then, and but that was I never had another feeling like that in my life. And still, I was never afraid of getting killed or anything while we were over there. Of course, relatively safe, I guess. Of course, we did have the Germans come in and strafe our fields a couple of times, and they did knock out some of our airplanes. But we were pretty much near that. We were supporting the infantry, so our outfit had to be fairly close, to the front lines. And then we'd have one of our officers. His job was to go take a jeep and go up to the front with our find out what our what our infantry wanted to know, where they wanted us to fly for, because then they had switched us to what they call a photo reconnaissance outfit. Before we were supporting the bombers, but now it became a reconnaissance outfit. They put cameras in our ship, in our airplanes, and the pilots would go over and take pictures of whatever spots the infantry wanted, bring the film back, have them developed. They had a photo section. That's how come I got all these pictures. Yeah. Had a photo section and he would bring the pictures back to the infantry so they know what was ahead of them. And that helped them along quite a lot. And then we, of course, after we got back, got in the port of New York and got off and got home, rode the train home, and of course we got home and it was just a terrifically good feeling, and on my side and on my folks' side as well. But I had only been home about 3 hours when I was out in the field cultivating. I just couldn't wait to get back. But and like I've said many times, I wouldn't want another war again just to get an education, but actually I got more education there than I would have never gone to any college after high school if I had. But there I gained a lot of knowledge, I should say. And we had to take so many things in our schooling, public speaking for one thing, and so many things that we would never have gotten anyways. But I said it was a lot of experience. But certainly we didn't want any war to be able to get all those kinds of experience. And I guess we about after we got home, we started farming again. That's about what that amounts to. We got in with my brothers and we got some land.
One time you told me about, like, you said you kind of like invented the windshield wiper before.
Oh yeah, that windshield wiper. Sorry, I forgot that one. But this was when we were at. This was at the base, I think, at Luxembourg. Well, anyway, that don't make much difference. We had gotten a batch of poor seals, oil seals. The propellers were the three-bladed automatic pitch, you might say. There was a piston in this dome up front that would move back and forth, and it would turn to pitch on the blades. But then to contain the oil pressure on this dome up in front, there was the gasket or oil ring or whatever you want to call it. And we got some of that were defective because that propeller would start leaking about the time the pilot got heading almost to his mission, and it would start squirting oil on his windshield.